The desert has always been a place of extremes. By day, the Nevada sun turns sand into fire, the horizon shimmering with heat that bends the air itself. By night, the temperature plunges, the land stripped bare, cold and silent beneath a sky heavy with stars. To outsiders, it is a wasteland. To those who know it, the desert is alive, watching, waiting, capable of giving life and stealing it away just as easily. Robert Hayes believed he understood that balance. At 41, he was a practical man, a contractor by trade, who found peace in wide open spaces. His wife, Elena, 39, was gentler, drawn to the quiet of the outdoors and the way the desert stripped life down to its essentials. Together, they raised two children. Daniel, 12 years old, curious and restless, always asking questions, and Sophie, 9, quiet, thoughtful, her wide eyes always scanning the world around her. The Hayes family lived in Reno, but they were no strangers to the wilderness. Robert often took them camping in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Elena kept journals of their trips, filling them with sketches of wildflowers and constellations. The children loved it most of all. For Daniel, a chance to climb rocks and chase lizards. For Sophie, the joy of sleeping under a canopy of stars. When Robert suggested a weekend trip into the Nevada desert in late September, no one hesitated. It would be just 3 days. They would leave on Friday, set up camp near the old Salt Wells trailhead, and return Monday. Elena called her sister to confirm their plans. "We'll be back Monday. Don't worry." It was the last time anyone heard her voice. The Hayes family left Reno in their dark green Jeep Cherokee. Neighbors saw them load gear into the back, sleeping bags, coolers, lanterns, and the tent Robert always packed with meticulous care. Daniel carried a football, promising he'd teach Sophie how to throw a spiral in the sand. Sophie clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, tucked into her backpack as if it too was going on an adventure. The drive east was uneventful. Gas station receipts later showed they stopped for fuel outside Fallon. From there, the records ended. By Sunday night, when they had not returned any calls, Elena's sister grew uneasy. She reassured herself at first, maybe poor cell reception. Maybe they decided to stay an extra day. But when Monday came and went with no word, unease turned to fear. By Tuesday morning, the authorities were called. Sheriff's deputies traced the family's route and found the first sign of trouble. The Jeep sat abandoned at the Salt Wells trailhead, doors locked, dust coating the windshield. Inside, the cooler was half full, water bottles still intact. Elena's purse on the back seat. The keys were gone. The camp, however, was not. There was no sign of a tent, no chairs, no fire pit, nothing to suggest the family had ever set up camp. The trail stretched into the desert, an empty line of sand and scrub, no footprints, no tire tracks, no sign of which direction they had gone. The search began within hours. Helicopters crisscrossed the skies, their rotors chopping the air, sweeping searchlights across miles of dunes and canyons. Volunteers on ATVs fanned out, combing ravines. Bloodhounds were brought in, their noses pressed to clothing from the Jeep. But once released into the desert, they circled aimlessly and lay down, unable to find a trail. By the second day, the search expanded to include dozens of square miles. Rangers scanned dry creek beds where flash floods sometimes claimed lives. Rescue teams rappelled into canyons, shouting the family's names, listening for echoes that never came. The heat was merciless. Daytime temperatures soared past 100 degrees, and the sand burned beneath boots. At night, the air dropped near freezing, forcing searchers to huddle in their own makeshift camps before resuming at dawn. The desert seemed determined to erase any trace of the Hayes family. As days passed, frustration mounted. Search coordinators spread maps across hoods of vehicles, marking zones in red ink, crossing them out one by one. They couldn't just vanish, one ranger muttered. But each night, the conclusion was the same: nothing. By the end of the first week, hope began to waver. No footprints, no clothing, no tent poles, no fires. It was as if the family had stepped out of their Jeep and walked straight into the air. Reporters descended on the town. Their headlines sharp and cruel. Family of 4 disappears in Nevada desert. Cameras captured images of the Jeep being towed away, dust streaking its sides like scars. Interviews with neighbors and relatives filled television screens. But none could explain what had happened. Elena's sister refused to give up. She stood at the trailhead for hours each day, staring into the horizon as if expecting to see figures walking back across the sand. She whispered their names into the wind: Robert, Elena, Daniel, Sophie. But the desert remained silent. Weeks became months. The search wound down. Volunteers went home. Helicopters stopped flying. Officials issued a statement. The Hayes family is presumed missing, cause unknown. But presumed missing was not an answer. To the people of Harrington, it felt impossible. An entire family does not vanish in daylight, not without leaving something behind. Yet the desert offered no clues, no explanations, only silence. And so the story settled into legend, a caution whispered among hikers and campers, a tale of a family swallowed whole. Parents warned children to stay away from salt wells. Locals began to call it the cursed trailhead because in the end, despite the helicopters, the search teams, the dogs, and the endless miles of sand scoured, the result was always the same. It was as if the desert had swallowed an entire family whole. The desert does not explain itself. When the search for the Hayes family ended, it left behind not answers, but emptiness for those who loved them. That emptiness became unbearable. Elena's sister, Margaret, refused to let the case fade. In the first year, she organized a candlelight vigil at the Salt Wells trailhead. Dozens of people came. Neighbors, classmates of Daniel and Sophie, church members, strangers drawn by sympathy. They lit candles in paper cups and placed them on the sand, their flames flickering against the vast night. Margaret read aloud from Elena's old journals, her voice breaking as she spoke of her sister's love for starlit skies. But as the years dragged on, the vigils grew smaller. By the 5th year, only a handful of faithful stood by her side. By the 8th, sometimes it was only Margaret, kneeling in the sand with a single candle trembling in the wind. She never stopped, though. Every September, she returned to the place where her family had vanished, whispering their names into the night. The disappearance fractured the families beyond repair. Robert's parents moved to Oregon, unable to live each day in a town haunted by absence. Elena's parents stayed but retreated into silence, their house filled with photographs that grew more painful to look at with each passing year. Margaret kept Elena's belongings boxed but untouched. She could not bring herself to call it closure. The community itself was divided. Some clung to the belief that it had been a tragic accident. Perhaps the family had wandered too far, been caught in a dust storm, succumbed to the extremes of heat and cold. Others whispered of foul play. They pointed to the Jeep left behind, the lack of footprints, the strange precision of the disappearance. An entire family does not simply vanish without leaving something. Theories circulated like dust devils. One story claimed the family had stumbled into cartel activity, drug runners moving shipments through the desert. Another insisted they had been victims of human traffickers, and a smaller, more paranoid group argued that they had been taken by the government, vanished because they had wandered too close to a hidden military test site. But as months turned to years, the disappearance morphed into legend. Locals began calling the region the Silent Dunes. Parents told their children never to wander off the marked trails. Truckers spoke of strange lights seen at night in the direction of salt wells. Some swore they heard voices when the wind shifted, whispers that carried across the sand. The Silent Dunes became a place people feared. Hikers reported compasses spinning uselessly. Campers claimed fires burned low no matter how much wood was added. Stories spread of travelers who passed through and felt watched. Though the horizon was empty, online, the case gained new life. Forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries dissected every scrap of information. Posts connected the Hayes disappearance to other vanishings across the Southwest. Some insisted it was cartel-related. Others swore it was evidence of supernatural activity, drawing maps of energy lines that converged near salt wells. A few spun it into conspiracy, linking it to Area 51 and secret underground bases. Each theory only deepened the mystery, but none brought the Hayes family home. Their house in Reno became a monument to absence. For years it sat untouched. The children's bedrooms still had posters on the walls, toys on the shelves, homework tucked into drawers. Elena's kitchen calendar remained frozen on September, the month they vanished. Neighbors cut the grass, sometimes leaving flowers on the porch. But no one lived there. It was as if time itself had been paused inside, waiting for a family that would never return. For Margaret, every year without answers was another fracture in her faith. She pressed the police for updates, demanded renewed searches, but each request ended the same way: no new evidence, no new leads. She grew accustomed to the phrase that haunted her dreams: case suspended. 10 years passed like that, 10 years of vigils that dwindled, of theories that multiplied, of silence that stretched across the desert like a shroud. And then, one autumn morning, that silence cracked. A group of hikers, straying off trail after a sandstorm, stumbled into a canyon newly uncovered by shifting dunes. At first they thought nothing of it, just another pocket of desert revealed by the wind. But as they moved deeper, their boots struck something half buried in the sand. Canvas, weathered, sun-bleached, torn, the remnants of a tent. They brushed away more sand and uncovered twisted metal poles, rusted cookware, and a child's shoe small enough to stop their hearts. The hikers froze, realizing what they had found. For 10 years, silence stretched unbroken, until hikers strayed off trail and found something buried in the sand. For 10 years, the Nevada desert kept its silence. The Hayes family had become a story, a warning, a mystery without answers. The Jeep found at the Salt Wells trailhead remained the last piece of evidence. No camp, no footprints, no remains, until the storm came in late September. A windstorm tore across the desert. Locals called it the kind of storm that rearranges the land itself. Dunes shifted, gullies deepened, dry canyons that had been buried for decades were opened again, as if the earth had decided to peel back one of its own secrets. A group of backpackers, for friends traveling through the backcountry, decided to explore one of these newly uncovered canyons. They were not searching for anything but novelty, a chance to see what the storm had revealed. Their boots crunched across fresh sand, the canyon walls raw and sharp where the wind had stripped them clean. The air smelled different there, not dry like the rest of the desert, but heavy, like dust disturbed from a long-closed room. The first hiker to notice it thought it was just fabric, a pale scrap sticking from the sand. Sun-bleached and brittle, she bent down, tugged, and felt resistance. With a call to her friends, they began to dig. The more sand they brushed away, the clearer it became. It was canvas, weathered, torn, but unmistakably canvas. A tent, collapsed and half consumed by sand. The metal poles lay twisted beside it, warped and rusted, fragile enough to snap with the pressure of a hand. What had once been a shelter now looked like a skeleton, its frame exposed. Around it, scattered like bones, were the remains of camp life: rusted cookware, pots caked with sand, a pan with its handle bent almost in half, a lantern, glass shattered, its metal frame eaten by corrosion. One of the hikers lifted it, only for it to crumble in his grip, falling into shards on the desert floor. Then came the discovery that froze them all: a shoe, small, faded red, its rubber sole cracked, but still intact after all these years. The kind of shoe no adult would wear, the kind of shoe that belonged to a child. None of them spoke. They didn't have to. Every one of them knew what it meant. The Hayes family had been found. They spread out, moving slowly, brushing away more sand. That was when they found the plate. At first it looked like scrap metal, half buried in a dune. One of them knelt and cleared the dirt, revealing embossed numbers. Slowly, the letters emerged: a license plate, The numbers matched those that had been printed in headlines 10 years earlier. The plate from the Hayes family's Jeep, but the Jeep had been found at Salt Wells Trailhead, miles from here. The presence of the plate at this camp meant only one thing. The vehicle had been moved. Someone, or something, had dragged it far from where it was discovered and scattered its remains across the desert. By now the hikers were shaking, adrenaline spiking as dread set in. They had stumbled onto something not meant to be found, and then one of them spotted the box. It was tucked beneath a slab of stone, half hidden by sand, a small tin container, corroded but still intact. With careful hands, they pried it open. Inside, wrapped in layers of cloth, was a journal. The cloth had absorbed most of the moisture and protected the pages inside, leaving them surprisingly well preserved. The name on the first page confirmed what they already suspected. The journal belonged to Elena Hayes. They flipped through it, fingers trembling. The early entries were almost ordinary. Notes about sunsets, sketches of dunes and stars. The children laughing as they chased each other across the sand. She wrote of Daniel's fascination with lizards and Sophie's delight at spotting constellations. Robert, she noted, had never seemed happier than when building a fire beneath the wide desert sky. But as the entries went on, the tone shifted. Her words grew shorter, urgent, written in uneven strokes. She described hearing sounds in the night, voices carried on the wind, though no other campers were near. She wrote of distant lights, glowing faintly on the horizon where no roads ran, moving as though lanterns were being carried across the dunes. One entry read, "Robert says it's tricks of the desert, but I know what I hear. We are not alone." The hikers turned page after page, their unease growing with every word. The final entry was short, rushed, and smeared at the edges as though written with a shaking hand. "We are not alone out here." Silence fell over the canyon. The desert around them seemed to grow heavier, as if even the air was listening. They left the site quickly after that, clutching the journal like a relic. When they reported their discovery, the authorities descended on the canyon, sealing it off from the public. Forensic teams marked the ground, bagged the cookware, the shoe, the lantern. The tent was cataloged, the license plate photographed, and Elena's journal, her final words, became the centerpiece of a case that was no longer cold. The Hayes family had been found, but not in a way anyone wanted, because what Elena had written did not suggest a simple tragedy. It suggested that in their final days, the family had been watched, and what the journal described made the desert feel far more dangerous than empty. When the canyon was sealed off, it became less a discovery site and more a stage where the desert's silence was finally speaking. Forensic vans lined the dirt road, their generators humming while floodlights turned night into day. Teams moved carefully, brushing sand from artifacts that had lain undisturbed for a decade. Every click of a camera, every bag sealed with evidence tape, felt like a challenge to the desert itself. "We will not let your secrets stay buried." The first confirmations came quickly. The cookware, the lantern, the tent poles, even the fabric, all matched purchase records and photos from the Hayes family's previous trips. Items found in the canyon could be tied directly to Robert and Elena. There was no longer doubt. The lost camp belonged to the Hayes family, but what lay scattered just beyond the tent poles forced even the most experienced investigators to stop and steady themselves. Bones. At first, they appeared animal, fragments sun-bleached and brittle, but as more were uncovered, the shapes became unmistakable. Ribs curved like pale crescents, a femur cracked cleanly in two, vertebrae aligned in a broken chain. Human remains. The desert had preserved them in fragments, like scattered pages torn from a book. Forensic teams laid them out on tarps, cataloging each piece, counting, measuring. When the DNA results returned, they confirmed the worst. The bones belonged to members of the Hayes family, yet something didn't fit. The remains accounted for only 2 individuals. 2 bodies lay in pieces, but 2 others were absent. No trace of the children, no fragments that could be matched to Daniel or Sophie. Even Robert's skeleton was incomplete. missing key bones that could not simply be explained away by animals or time. It was as if the desert had selectively given back only part of the truth and kept the rest. Then came the journal. Elena's writing, painstakingly restored page by page, became the most haunting testimony of all. Investigators read her words aloud in hushed tones, as though speaking them might summon what she had described. At first, her notes were simple. Sketches of Daniel kicking his football across the sand, Sophie collecting rocks shaped like hearts, Robert laughing as he built their fire. But soon the tone shifted. The handwriting grew jagged, rushed. The entries dripped with unease. Lights on the dunes at night. One line read, "Too steady to be stars. Too low to be planes. Lantern lights where no one should be." Another entry, written 2 days later, was worse. "Figures on the ridge. Robert says it's my imagination, but I saw them standing in silence, watching." And then, a week into the trip, "The wind carries voices. I heard Daniel's name whispered though he slept beside me." Sophie woke, crying. Said she dreamed someone was calling from the sand. The final entries before the last chilling line painted a picture of a family no longer camping for pleasure, but enduring something they could not explain. Elena's fears seeped through every word. And then the last page. "We are not alone out here." The evidence around the site seemed to support her terror. Just beyond the family's camp, investigators found fire pits, rings of stone blackened with ash. They were old, but not ancient. And crucially, they were not the Hayes family's. Their placement was wrong. Too far from the tent, too crudely built. It was survival fire, the kind built by someone who had lived long in the desert shadows. Someone else had been there. And finally, the Jeep, dragged in pieces across the desert. Its remnants told their own story. Mechanics studying the rusted frame and wires discovered something deliberate. The ignition system had been tampered with. Wires had been cut cleanly. Not frayed or corroded. It was sabotage. Whoever had been with the family, or whoever had come after, had ensured their only means of escape was gone. That discovery shattered the last belief that the Hayes disappearance had been a simple accident. No longer could it be explained as a family lost in the heat, succumbing to the extremes of the desert. Their vehicle had been disabled, their camp compromised. Someone had interfered, but who? And why leave the site untouched for a decade, only to let it be revealed by shifting sand? Theories flooded Harrington and the wider world. Some pointed to criminals, smugglers using the desert as a hidden corridor. The Hayes family might have stumbled upon something they were never meant to see. Others suggested hermits, long vanished from society, defending their secrecy at all costs. But the journal's words left room for something darker. Lantern lights, figures in silence, voices on the wind. None of it sounded like smugglers. None of it sounded like hermits. It sounded like something older, stranger. The kind of desert mystery whispered in ghost stories but never proven around the canyon. Even the investigators admitted unease. Radios cut out without explanation. GPS devices flickered, refusing to lock onto coordinates. One deputy later confessed he felt eyes on him the entire time he cataloged evidence. The sheriff's office released a careful statement. Evidence indicates Hayes' family campsite confirmed. Remains partially recovered. Cause of disappearance undetermined. Investigation ongoing. But behind those words was a truth few wanted to voice aloud. The Hayes family had not been alone in the desert. The only question left was this: did the Hayes family encounter criminals in the dunes, or something hidden in the desert that no one was meant to see? The discovery of the Hayes family's lost camp should have brought closure. Instead, it opened wounds that refused to heal. The evidence, the bones, the sabotaged Jeep. Elena's haunting journal answered some questions, but raised even more. What happened in those dunes? Who had cut the ignition wires? Who had built the fire pits scattered around their camp? And why had 2 members of the family never been accounted for? The town of Reno and the smaller desert communities nearby split sharply in their explanations. Some clung to the rational. They believed the Hayes family had been victims of foul play, smugglers, traffickers, criminals moving quietly through Nevada's vast emptiness. The sabotage jeep was proof enough. Somebody didn't want them leaving, one retired deputy told a local reporter. You cut a man's vehicle out here, you're cutting his throat. But others were not so certain. They pointed to the journal, to the lights Elena described on the dunes. The figures she swore stood in silence. The voices carried on the wind. Cartels don't whisper names on the breeze, a rancher said at a town hall. And they don't stalk families for days just to watch. The canyon where the camp was found soon earned a new name. People no longer called it just another gully carved by storms. They called it Hayes Hollow, and Hayes Hollow quickly became a place of dread. Hikers who ventured near spoke of strange sensations. Compasses spun uselessly, pointing north one moment and south the next. Radios picked up bursts of static even in clear weather. Campfires burned low. No matter how much fuel was fed to them, some swore they felt watched. Even when no one was there, a few turned back halfway. Unable to explain the crawling sense of being unwelcome, word spread online, feeding the theories that had never gone quiet in the decades since the disappearance. On mystery forums, threads stretched into hundreds of posts. Some users insisted Hayes Hollow was a smuggling corridor, the site of a brutal crime long buried by sand. Others argued it was a military test zone, connected to hidden tunnels and experimental technology. And then there were those who leaned into the supernatural, desert cults, spirits bound to the dunes, or even older presences, something that had lived in the silence long before maps ever marked the land. Videos sprang up on YouTube, narrating the case over eerie footage of empty deserts. Millions of viewers clicked, adding their own comments to the storm of speculation. To the world, the Hayes family had become more than missing persons. They had become legend, but for their relatives, the legend was a knife that never stopped cutting. Margaret, Elena's sister, still drove to the Salt Wells trailhead every September. She left flowers at the post where search flyers had once been stapled, their edges curling in the wind. Some years she was joined by neighbors. Other years she stood alone. They're still out there, she told a reporter once. I don't know how, but I feel it. Inside the Hayes home, long since closed to renters or buyers, the children's bedrooms remained untouched. Posters of superheroes and storybook characters still hung on the walls. A stuffed rabbit, Sophie's favorite, rested on a shelf, its fur worn by time. The house smelled faintly of dust and lavender, a place preserved in waiting, though no one would return to it. And then came the final twist. 1 year after the camp was discovered, another group of hikers ventured into Hayes Hollow. They had read about the case online, curiosity pulling them off the marked trails despite local warnings. The canyon looked the same as it had in the photographs. Rusted cookware, still half buried. Torn canvas fluttering faintly in the wind, but near a cluster of rocks at the edge of the site. One of the hikers noticed something strange. Carvings. At first they looked like scratches made by erosion, but as the hikers brushed away sand, the marks became clearer. Letters, names, Daniel, Sophie. The names were carved deeply into the rock face, etched with deliberate strokes, and beneath them, a date. It was from 2 years after the Hayes family vanished. The hikers left shaken, reporting their find immediately. Authorities investigated, but offered no explanation. The carvings were real, the date was real, and it meant that someone, perhaps even the children themselves, had been alive long after the world believed them lost. The story spread like wildfire. For some, it was proof that foul play had kept the Hayes children alive, hidden in the desert. For others, it was evidence of something unexplainable, something that had claimed them but not destroyed them. Hayes Hollow remained closed to the public after that, but stories continued to swirl. Whispers of laughter in the dunes at night, flickers of lantern light moving against the ridges, and always, the carvings, 2 names in stone, dated years beyond the family's disappearance. The desert had buried its secret for a decade, but in the end, it had not buried everything. Because sometimes the desert does not bury the past, it keeps it, waiting to be found.